These have got major games being played within the Asia-Pacific region as well as the European. So the European Union, for example, funds some very large education development projects in the Pacific. You wouldn't think that they're running a big project for training educational planners and developers for all the Pacific countries, funded by the European Union, directed by an Australian, by the way. And I certainly were, for 12 years, was contracting groups from Australian universities around the world, to work on development projects funded by UNESCO, by World Bank, by European Union, by all sorts of UNAIDS, all sorts of organisations. So what actually happens? Well, if there's a major project which has been agreed by a General Conference of UNESCO or by the Council of Ministers or the Council of Europe, these are going to be out on the airways and people will bid for them. And that comes back to what we're trying to do within Eidos, to profile the groups of researchers who have the expertise which fits a particular type of project which one of these organisations is seeking to fund and to have done. Clearly, if you're going to do that, you have to look at what are your sort of strategic partnerships, because we are normally interested in particular if you're looking at developing countries, what are your links with the developing countries? So first of all, we need to know who are the, if it's an ICT project to facilitate distance learning through the Commonwealth of Learning. John Daniel's a friend. He was my successor actually in UNESCO. He took over when I left my job, but now has gone to Commonwealth of Learning. Those projects will be up and accessible. We can certainly help make them accessible through our network because we have links with these organisations. But we also need a team which can actually do the project. Okay, so we need to know who are the experts in this particular field. That's why we're setting up the networks, to have that capability of quickly responding to a World Bank proposal, for example, for development or evaluation in a given field. So it's important that we know also about your international profile as well. It's good to have people on a team who've actually had some experience or worked in developing countries. But it's also important to have links. So if your university, for example, has the sister university in a developing country and you've been working, the university has been working, or the government department has been working with another country, that's always very important. Because normally in most development agencies, unless the request is seen to be strongly supported by, if not come from, the developing countries that we're targeting, then you're not going to get very far. So what I'm saying is, if you're interested in having an international profile, you have to have international links and strong links at that. So when we're asking you for details of what you are doing as an individual, also think about what your institution is doing by way of its links with other communities outside your own. Certainly a lot of the issues are going to be things like the problems of Indigenous learning, the problems of early childhood, the problems of science and maths and tech, ICT. Those are all sorts of issues which are very important to the countries concerned. So as part of your profile, also highlight some of your international experience, either as an individual if you had it, as an institution or as a faculty as you had it, because that's also important. What we will try to do is put the two together. That is to put the teams which we're trying to forge here together with the projects which are forthcoming. Sometimes you've got to be a little bit proactive as well. I mean, if UNESCO or the Council of Europe doesn't know who you are or where you come from or how you can contribute, obviously they want deliverables. They want results which are going to be useful to them. So we have to be able to demonstrate more than just that you've published, but that you've actually had an impact on policy and practice in your own country and beyond that. So what I'm saying is that we do have quite a lot of contacts in the development agencies, the international agencies. Also think about the private sector. We've been talking about the private sector as well. And to remember that increasingly the funds are more and more difficult to get from government. And certainly for educational and social research, more and more difficult to get from government. So we have to begin to think much more broadly than we have traditionally. You know, to get outside of our little box called a classroom, our little box called a school, our little box called a university lecture theatre, and think beyond that. To think towards, particularly, we're talking about both economic good, how do we improve the levels of productivity within our communities, but also more general social benefit, the common good. That's something I keep on coming up and jumping up and down about, because some of the problems are going to hit us in the 21st century arise out of excessive privatisation, particularly in education, health and other fields, because a lot more people will fall through the cracks. So how do we actually begin to look at the issues which the current economic rationalism is driving us into, and what sort of issues the governments of tomorrow will face? Now, the government of today in Queensland is facing a health crisis which is being compounded by a whole series of things over the last 15 to 20 years. We're going to hit the same sorts of problems in education down the track as well. So what are those likely to be, and can we be ready to tackle those? And come from our experience and research within our own country, can we contribute to similar sorts of problems in other countries beyond us? So think also about the private sector and what sorts of public-private partnerships would be to the common good. Because sometimes they are. I mean, I work with Gulf Aquitaine in Venezuela, for example. I told the company that they're likely to be kicked out by the Venezuelan government because they've been so lousy in terms of what they've done in terms of exploitation of the resources, and convinced them that they should invest in development of community learning centres, both to provide training for their workers so that they can improve their productivity in terms of exploration and production of oil, but also for the families of those communities. So there had to be a common good as well as a direct benefit to the corporation. So think of those win-win situations with a Delphin land lease or with other private sector corporations who perhaps have, some of these companies actually do have a social conscience, believe it or not, and are looking to the longer term, sometimes more than our government may even be doing. So think about the ways in which you could forge partnerships which actually could lead to improvement in the education within your own faculty or university or local school community. So the game we're about now is saying, well, okay, how can we actually move into a much broader base for the funding of research and development programs than we have hitherto done? How can you tap into some of the sources which we have not yet tapped into? But obviously you're competing against a Harvard or a London Institute of Education when you're doing that. So, you really have to be good at what you're doing and be able to stand up in competition with some of those groups. Thank you.